Hi, this is Mac of Mac's List. Find Your Dream Job is presented by Mac's List, an online community where you can find free resources for your job search, plus online courses and books that help you advance your career. My latest book is called Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. It's a reference guide for your career that covers all aspects of the job search, including expert advice in every chapter. You can get the first chapter for free by visiting maxlist.org/anywhere. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag, Becky Thomas, and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about how to make a hiring manager like you. We've all heard about the importance of chemistry in hiring, but how do you make a connection with a hiring manager you meet for the first time? This week's guest expert is Dalena Bradley. She's a career coach who helps job seekers get ready for interviews. She says you can make an employer like you in an interview, and later in the show, Dalena shows us how to do this. The percentage of people quitting jobs has reached record levels, says a recent story on the Planet Money podcast. And that's actually good news for workers and the economy. In a moment, Ben explains why in his final resource segment for our show. You apply for a job. A short while later, you discover a typo in the resume you sent. What do you do next? That's our question of the week. It comes from listener Marjorie Alvarez of Portland, Oregon. Becky shares her advice shortly. As always, let's first check in with the Mac's List team. And every week, Ben, for 130 episodes now, you've been out there searching the nooks and crannies of the internet and looking for websites, books, and tools you can use in our listeners' job searches and careers. So what have you found for listeners this week?
Yes, I've been in every nook and cranny of the internet, all on company time.
Oh, gosh.
Right. And so this,
I like to think of you wearing a miner's helmet when you're doing that.
They call me the English Muffin Man down in the caves.
Okay, I'm going to have to ponder that.
So this week I want to talk about a really cool short podcast I heard recently. It came from National Public Radio's Planet Money team, and it's called Why Quitting is Awesome. It's short. It's just about 6 minutes long, but it's filled with some really interesting information about the current labor market in the United States. So you've probably heard about the unemployment report. This is the one that the news makes a big deal about every month, and the politicians either say is great or awful, depending on what side of the aisle they're on. And this report is basically just telling you how many jobs were gained or lost in a month. It's a net measure of the total number of people who are working or not working. The podcast, this Why Quitting is Awesome show I listen to, talks about a different, relatively unknown monthly report that the government generates. It's called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. That's JOLTS for short. And this is a monthly measure of all the new job openings in America relative to the number of people who are unemployed. So it's kind of like a supply and demand way of looking at the labor market. So, for example, if you look back at the recession about 10 years ago, the JOLTS report showed that there were 7 unemployed people for every 1 job opening. That's clearly bad times and a really tough market for job seekers. Today, we're in a much better economy, and that number is 1.1 unemployed people for every job opening. So that's pretty much like 1 person for every job.
Well, that's great.
It is. Now, this doesn't take into account where specifically you live, or there could be a misalignment of skills. There's a lot of job for people in tech, but you don't have a tech background. So take this with a grain of salt. But the most interesting part of this JOLTS report is actually about the quit rate, which is the percentage of people who are voluntarily leaving their jobs in search of new opportunities. And this is where the name of the episode, Why Quitting is Awesome, comes from. The idea behind this metric is that people generally quit when they feel really confident about their ability to find a replacement job. And so the percentage of people who are quitting is a bellwether for how people feel about the job market. Again, good news here.
Right.
Because the quit rate is about 2.2%, and that's double what it was 10 years ago, which says that, people are feeling much more confident about what the labor market looks like and are leaving jobs that they don't like or feel limited at. So the bottom line for job seekers out there is if you're looking for work today, and right now it's early 2018, I'll timestamp this, it's a really good labor market. If you like data, stuff like this, I really encourage you to check it out. Again, this comes from the NPR Planet Money team, and it's called Why Quitting is Awesome. And as always, we will include the URL in the show notes.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. And as our longtime listeners know, you've been sharing this and other resources since our very first episode back in October of 2015. That was 130 episodes ago. So I know this is your final show, and you're not leaving Mac's List. You'll continue as managing director and doing and growing our educational services and products and our work with employers. But it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show.
We're still working next to each other, Mac, but it's been fun to be here, and we will meet again. I don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Well, Ben's voice this will not be the last time Ben's voice appears on this podcast. I can guarantee that. He'll come in, he'll miss it. He'll fill in occasionally.
Grace the studio.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time I think I'm out, they keep pulling me back in.
Of course. Right. We're not going to let you go that easily. But also, it kind of ties into your resource of how quitting is awesome because you did. This was voluntary. You didn't get fired.
I'm feeling super confident about the podcast market right now. So I'm out.
Everybody's got a podcast.
Yay.
Yeah. Well, terrific. Well, I'm so grateful to you, Ben, because you and I have been doing this since the start. And when I had this idea, you just got foursquare behind it, and I think you deserve a huge amount of credit for the quality of the show. And obviously, we're a team here, the four of us, but you've been here from the start. So thank you for helping to make this show happen.
Thank you, Mac.
Yeah,
we will miss your all your good dad jokes and funny punches at yourself. So
I know.
So that will be lacking, but we'll make up for it.
We'll figure something out.
We will. So change is coming. So Becky, you'll be taking over the resource segment of the show. I'm excited about that. How do you feel about that?
Got big shoes to fill.
That's right.
But luckily I have big feet, so just kidding.
Good. And Jessica, you're doubling up. You'll continue on the soundboard and as co-host, of course, but you're also taking over the listener segment.
I will. Yeah.
I'm sort of sad to give it up. I love the listener questions,
I know.
But you're great at that too. So
well, thanks.
We're gonna be.
Again, it's a tag team effort, so you'll be able to still contribute. But we'll all have our spots.
Yeah. Now, one of the things Jessica and I get to do once a month is we do a group informational interview with job seekers in Portland, Oregon. So those usually book up pretty fast, but if you're ever interested in that, just write Jessica or me. But I know watching you in those meetings how much you enjoy helping people answer their questions.
I do. Everybody's been through that job search, quandary and the search itself, and it's tough when you kind of don't feel like you have the support. And so I love being able to answer people's questions and just make people feel at ease with whatever it is they're going through.
Good. Well, speaking of questions, let's turn to you, Becky, for this week's listener question. What do you have in the mailbag this week?
Yeah, my last question as the official listener question answerer comes from listener Marjorie Alvarez of Portland, Oregon. And this is an interesting question. It addresses one of my favorite topics, which is spelling and grammar. She asks, I applied for a job and then realized that there was a serious typo on my resume. Should I fix the typo and resubmit my application, or should I just hope that the employer doesn't notice? This is a tricky one, and I can just imagine that feeling of looking back over it after sending your resume and being like, oh my gosh, that is spelled completely wrong. It's the worst feeling.
It really
I feel for Marjorie on this one. Yeah. And I want to hear what you guys think, but I would tell her to, hopefully you've caught it quick, and fix the resume and just reply to your initial email and be like, hey, just noticed there was a small error on my resume, so here's the corrected version. Thanks, and don't make a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. I really think that hoping the employer doesn't notice is not the right move.
No.
Even in submitting your application, you're showing this potential employer what kind of employee would you be. So, like, if you're gonna just make a mistake and not tell anybody, that's not a good move. You have to own up to the mistake once you've identified it, fix it, and let the employer know, hey, here's what happened and here's how I fixed it. And I think the same goes for resumes. Even though it does feel like you're calling attention to your own error, you did make a mistake. And, I, as a employer, if it was me, I would probably still ding you a little bit for the initial typo, because you do need to catch that stuff on the first round, but you also realize that everybody makes mistakes and you appreciate and respect the person for fixing their error.
And being honest about it and
Yeah.
sharing it. And again, like you said, hopefully it happened quickly and
Yeah.
that you can sort of, I agree with everything you just said of, catch it quickly if you can, send a reply to that same email or whatever it was. I just assumed that it was an email. And just
that was
say,
the other thought is, like, if they did submit it
I'm
through
wondering.
an ATS or something where it's harder to take it back, I don't know if I would submit a whole new application in that situation.
That's an interesting conundrum for
Yeah.
that one. I was just thinking through what would happen if it was through an ATS or something like that. Because in my mind, in my vision, it was always like
You've got the hiring
replying to
manager's
that email.
Yeah.
And then that's easier because there's like the, you can follow that track
Exactly.
of and just be like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
Fix this. Don't say oops, but
Yeah.
but I noticed that there was an error, and I wanted to send a corrected version.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. But yeah, I don't know what Mac and Ben. What do you guys think about the ATS? What would you do in that situation?
Well, I know some ATS systems actually let you log in and edit your application, and you can
interesting.
upload a new resume and do the whole document management thing. That's all predicated on the idea that you make those edits before they start
Right.
the review process.
Right.
For the more generic example of just emailing someone, the hiring manager, again, I think most people acknowledge that people make mistakes. And I think given the option of acknowledging the mistake or ignoring it, I think most people would prefer that you acknowledge the mistake.
Absolutely.
I would still say you're probably going to get dinged on this one way or another, though.
Yeah. It's hard to get out of that situation scot-free.
It is, but I do think that speaks so highly to your character of not just letting it slide by and hoping that the manager doesn't notice, because most
That
times
shows
the
sloppy,
manager
yeah.
will notice. And yeah, I think that taking that initiative and speaking up about it shows much more value than just trying to pretend. Because it's that whole attention to detail thing. And yes, you should have caught it beforehand, but at least you caught it later. And then speaking up about it does show that, I agree with what you said,
Yeah.
Becky.
Yeah.
I think you want to avoid the error, but if you do make the mistake, admit it. And I think you'd rather not have made the error, but acknowledging it and calling and fixing it is going to, I think, reflect well on you.
I think so too.
I'd also throw out there that this is a mistake probably everyone has made.
Absolutely.
In the era of submitting lots of applications online.
Sure.
And I am absolutely positive that at some point in one job search or another, I sent an employer, a cover letter with the wrong employer's name
That's
on it
what
or
I was
something
just
like that.
gonna say. That has
undoubtedly
always been
that has happened.
That has
Oh my
always
gosh.
been my stress, and thankfully, I don't think that it has ever happened.
Yeah.
But I always double check after I send it that I sent it to the right name and that everything went through, because that's always just my stress. Yeah.
I expect for the three of you, certainly for me, when you read that question, Becky, through my head went a number of occasions where I've misspelled somebody's name or gotten basic facts wrong on an application letter or a grant application or some important business document.
Yeah.
So we've all been there.
We have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great advice. Well, thank you for the question. And And starting next week, Jessica will now be turning, you're going to be turning the mailbag over to Jessica.
Yeah, I've got the mailbag in my hand. I'm handing it over to Jessica. There you go.
Perfect.
Yes, the Max List logo is on it. Okay.
It's full of letters.
All right. It's a
Keep
trophy.
sending them.
So send your questions to Jessica. Her email is jessica@maxlist.org. You can also call the listener line. That's area code 716-JOB-TALK. Or post your question on the Max List Facebook group. And if we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of our book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. And then if you have ideas for resources, don't forget, Becky's taking over that job. So please email her.
Send us everything.
Yes, Becky@maxlist.org. We'll be back in a moment, and when we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert, Dalena Bradley, about how to make a hiring manager like you. Ageism in hiring is against the law. It's also a fact of life in today's job market. If you're 59 years old like me, you face an uphill climb when you look for work. I want to help you overcome those odds, so I've put my best job interview advice for older workers into one new guide. It's called How to Fight Ageism in a Job Interview, and it gives you the skills you need to beat the barriers older workers face. You'll learn why you should embrace your age rather than run from it, how to talk about the taboo topic of age, and what you can do to diffuse age as a factor in hiring. Get your free copy of How to Fight Ageism in a Job Interview today. Visit maxlist.org/fightageism. That's maxlist.org/fightageism. Now let's get back to the show. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Dalena Bradley. Dalena Bradley is a professional resume writer, interview coach, and career marketing specialist. Before launching her own practice, Dalena was an executive recruiter with Woodworth International Group and an outplacement consultant with Lee Hecht Harrison. She also worked in corporate communications for Hyatt Hotels and the Nestle Beverage Company. And she joins us today in the Max List studio here in Portland. It's been a while since we've had a guest in the studio. So, Dalena, thanks for coming downtown.
Well, thank you for having me, Mac.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Now, Dalena, we're talking about this week about how to make hiring managers like you. And I have to say, when you and I talked about this topic, I got excited because I think people do want to be liked in when they're walking into an interview, but they're probably very stressed out at that point, aren't they?
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So why is it important to make that connection, to be likable to a hiring manager when you walk into that interview room?
Well, by the time you've gotten to an interview, it's very likely you've been vetted. You know, you have the skills to do the job, at least judging from your resume and maybe an initial phone call. So by the time you make it to that in-person interview stage, they want to talk to you. They want to find out if they can work with you. And what that means is if they like you. So that is an extremely important component of the hiring process as much as having the skill set.
So you've got the technical skills, the hard skills when you walk into that room. That you don't have to prove that anymore. But I imagine some listeners might think, this sounds like high school. I have to be popular or I have to be liked. But what you're really talking about are a different set of skills. They're soft skills, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yes.
And can you give us examples of what those skills are and the kinds of things people should be paying attention to?
You bet. So a couple of confidence builders. One of the things I wanted to talk about before getting into some of those soft skills is before you walk into the building, make sure that you do an appearance check. Because making sure that you look good, that you don't have any kale from lunch in your teeth, that your buttons are buttoned properly, that will help you build confidence before you ever walk into the building. And from there, you're on stage. Think of anyone that you meet as you approach on the elevator ride up, in the lobby, as a potential coworker. And it's important to have a friendly demeanor and to be friendly to people. And when you meet the receptionist, saying hello, being friendly, to anyone who may walk by, just having that relaxed demeanor, someone that you would want to, work with or have them work with you. So that's really important before you ever get started. Paying attention to your appearance and also just observing your surroundings a little bit, right? As conversation starters potentially. And that also gives you a little idea of maybe the culture of the company. You're gathering data as you're waiting in the lobby.
Okay, so you're not looking at your phone, you're not looking at magazines, you're paying attention to your surroundings.
That's right. And also just gathering those data points as conversation starters, having your phone turned off completely and out of sight, like you said, is really important because you want to be 100% present before you ever walk in.
Okay. And phones are distractions, so it's good to turn it off completely.
Yes.
Okay.
I also suggest people stand as they wait for
That's
the
interesting.
interviewer to walk in.
What's the advantage of that?
That's another confidence builder, I believe. Because when the person comes in and you meet with them, and you meet them first, and you are looking at them eye to eye, you're on equal ground. And you are an equal participant in this. Interviewers think, wow, I'm going for the interview. The employer has all the power, and I am the interviewee. It's sometimes a position of where they don't feel like they have as much power, but really standing up, and when the person comes in and you're on equal ground, that can be really helpful.
I think also that as you talk, it occurs to me it might help just with a little nervous energy too, because you can walk a little bit, you sort of shift your weight. It probably helps put you at ease, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you've checked your appearance, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think we've all been in meetings where somebody's wardrobe was a little off and it's kind of embarrassing and you don't know whether to say anything or not, or maybe there is that kale in the teeth. You've walked in, you paid attention to your surroundings, the managers come in, you're standing, and what happens next?
What happens next is there's an introduction, and you are going to give a firm, dry handshake, make eye contact, and smile. Those are very basic things to do when you first meet someone in any situation, but particularly these first few seconds. These seconds are mission critical to building that first impression. So you're giving that firm, dry handshake, looking them in the eye, you're smiling, you're saying, it's very nice to meet you. I'm sure they will have said, hi, my name is Sam Jones. Nice to meet you, Sam. People like to hear their name. It's good to repeat their name.
It's the sweetest sound, isn't it? Do you know that expression?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's, is it Dale Carnegie who has said that, the sweetest sound is someone's name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. So you've got that handshake. Why is a good, firm, dry handshake so important in establishing likability?
Well, because if you offer a weak, limp hand, that can give the person an impression that you might not be confident in yourself. And if you're not confident in yourself, then you may be less likely to be able to do the job. So that direct connection right off the bat is really important.
Good. Now, so you've introduced yourself, you're standing there. What happens next? Do you make small talk, Dalena, or do you just go straight to the interview room? What's going to help the candidate?
Yes, use these seconds as you are walking into the office. Presumably, you have a little bit of, let's say, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Sometimes the interviewer will kick it off. They will break the ice a little bit, and you can follow their lead. But if that's not the case, then use that time. Make a little bit of conversation. You will have checked the surroundings in the lobby. Maybe you saw a fascinating piece of pottery or some interesting artwork on the wall. Maybe there's some construction going on outside of the building. Maybe you have some people in common. As part of the research that you should have done before your interview, you research the interviewer. and perhaps you have some colleagues in common or work history in common, friends in common, that's a time to bring something like that up. And there's always the weather.
Yeah, it's a classic. And I can remember as a young adult thinking, it's so trivial to talk about the weather. But as with maturity, I've seen that people, they feel awkward with silence, don't they? And people want that silence to be filled. And it makes them, puts them at ease, but to your point, also increases their likability, doesn't it?
I think it does. It shows that you are interested in building a relationship with your interviewer and that you're engaged. Yeah. You're ready to go. And you're being friendly. It's just friendliness.
Yeah. Which can be hard to do when you're in what is candidly a high-stress situation, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I know you're a big fan of reading people. Can you tell us more about that? Because here you've met this person, you're walking down the hall, you're getting ready to walk into a room, maybe with just that interviewer, but perhaps a panel. How can reading people help? Right.
Again, these seconds are really great for data gathering. Presumably you're probably following it at some distance behind the person, maybe you're side by side, but pay attention to the way they move. Do they move quickly? Do they move more slowly? Do they seem like a more reserved personality? Do they seem like more of an extrovert? These are all data points you can gather to use to build rapport. Because if you feel this person is more reserved, perhaps you adapt your style somewhat. If you're an extreme extrovert off the charts and you're a really enthusiastic personality, you don't want to completely overwhelm or overpower a more reserved person. And the opposite is true as well.
So this is going to help you not only be effective in the interview, but it's going to help with your likability as well.
Yes. Adapting your style shows that you're paying attention to the person and that detail.
Okay. So what happens next? What about when you're sitting down, particularly, let's talk about rapport. And because in the end, rapport is about making a connection. What's your best advice, Dalena, about establishing rapport to increase your likability?
So again, making that small talk on the way to the interview and having questions, to ask is important. Another thing is body language. So I was talking about when you're following the person, watching how they move and that sort of thing. Once you're seated, that's another time to read your interviewer's body language and to use good body language yourself. So it's building rapport non-verbally. So for example, what I suggest to job seekers is to sit upright or slightly forward in their seat and not sit too far back, because if you sit too far back, then it shows like you're not that interested. Also, crossing your leg in like a figure four position, where your ankle is sort of over your knee, that's a really casual way to sit in a first interview type of situation. So sitting upright and leaning forward, watch your interviewer, because if they lean forward, it's good to mirror them. Because it shows that you are paying attention to them and you're interested in continuing to relationship build, and I'm paying attention to you, so I'm going to mirror you just a little bit. If they sit back just a little bit, maybe you do. If they lean one direction or another slightly, you do too. Keep it subtle. Don't go overboard. If someone itches their head or fiddles with their clothes, please don't mirror that.
Right.
But that's another way to build rapport. Also maintaining good eye contact throughout the interview, smiling throughout the interview. It's very easy to forget to smile when you are in this situation where you want to do well and answer the questions correctly so that you can get the job, but remember to smile occasionally.
What are the benefits of smiling, Dalena? How does that help a candidate?
I think it shows that you are, a friendly, approachable personality, that you are enjoying the conversation, because that's a very important aspect where you are acting like you're interested and enjoying being in it there, being in the position to have this opportunity in this job.
And I know for some candidates who just struggle with the nerves that come with interviewing, that can be hard to smile and do the things that you're recommending, which all sound spot on to me. It'll be approachable and friendly and interested. So it's good that you're laying all this out. I know people want to show excitement and enthusiasm. Can you be too excited?
Sure.
Yeah.
You don't want to be fake. You want to be genuine. And so I think you probably can be too excited, especially if you say how excited you are over and over and over. I believe that interviewers want to see authenticity, and by all means, give positive language. Be sure to say, wow, this sounds like a really interesting position, and I want to know more, that sort of thing. But using a lot of gesturing, too much gesturing can be distracting, and saying how excited rather than the content of what it is you're saying is probably overkill.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to also talk about barriers, putting up nonverbal barriers when you're talking.
Yeah, give us some examples of that.
Right. So we all know that crossing our arms when we're talking with someone can put up a physical barrier. And if you're sitting there in the interview, you've got your arms crossed, or maybe you've brought a portfolio in and you've got that portfolio up against your chest, be sure to have your arms uncrossed and not have anything in front of you, because covering up your torso like that, subconsciously, it builds mistrust. You need to be open with your body language and not hide parts of yourself. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, as you talk, we've done a number of interviews now about job interviews with other experts, and we've talked about the research you need to do before you walk into the room to understand the employer, and the preparation you need to do to both highlight your own skills and draw employers out about your problems. But what I love about this conversation is I think a point you're making here is that it's also like doing a presentation, and you've got to pay attention to how you present yourself and how you engage your audience, whether it's one person or a panel. You're not on a stage, but in a sense, you are.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great conversation. Now, tell us what's coming up next for you, Dalena.
Well, I am continuing in my practice of coaching executives and professionals one-on-one on how to get prepared and feel confident going into their interviews. I'll continue sharing resources on my website and through presentations locally.
Great. And I know you've put together a special gift for our listeners. It's a collection of interview success tips that you've used with your clients, and people can download those by visiting DalenaBradley.com/findyourdreamjob, and we'll include that URL in the show notes. Thanks for coming to the studio today, Dalena.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. We're back in the Max List studio. Now, tell me, what are your thoughts about my conversation with Dalena? Ben, you want to final show, Ben Forstag?
Well, you learned something new even after 130 episodes, and her suggestion about standing up before while you're waiting for the interview. I mean, I'm not sure that would actually calm me down. Usually, like sitting down helps me feel a little bit more grounded and like gives me some space to like breathe and calm down. But I can also see your point about when the employer opens up the door or walks around the corner to meet you, you're already standing and at attention. It sets a good first visual, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think a lot of her tips about, she was talking about likability, but it's about, to me, they were about removing barriers between you and this other person, because I think a lot of folks walk into job interviews and they're nervous, understandably, but they also feel like they're supplicants. They're waiting to be picked or waiting for somebody to give something to them, and they're problem solvers. They're not the peer of the manager, but they've got a lot to offer.
Or sometimes people act as if it's a confrontation, like you're walking into a gauntlet or something. And I can understand where that feeling comes from, but really that's generally not what most hiring managers are trying to do in an interview.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to kind of jump on that train, but then move it, adjust it a little bit. I don't know. The metaphor lost itself. But in terms of kind of, I think people are often coming in sort of, and you are kind of nervous, so you're like going over your points in your head of like, I have to remember to say this and this and this, and it's almost, you are so focused on what you're going to say. And I liked her focus on, or her tips on, reading what's around you to be able to be present and to be able to use that as both conversation starters and to be able to understand the person in front of you so that you can build that rapport with somebody, and then also set yourself at ease. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I would just go back to the point that she made at the very beginning, which is that if you got the interview, they probably already think that you have the skills.
Absolutely.
And you just need to figure out if you are going to enjoy working together.
Yeah.
So you do need to show some of your personality and not be like too worried about, I mean, of course you got to prepare for your, the answers to the questions and all of these things. But once you get there, you should be prepared enough that you can relax a little bit and show your personality and show them, your culture fit and how you might fit in with the office culture and things like that. So I think her tips were great. And
absolutely. I agree. She shared so many good tips, and it was just really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were terrific tips. And I know people can, again, get that tip sheet from her by visiting that URL that we mentioned.
Yeah, I know she had a lot more that she wanted to share that we didn't have time to get to.
She did mention that after the interview ended. So check that out if you when you have a moment. And thank you Dalena for joining us in the studio, and thank you all, our listeners, for joining us this week. And Ben, farewell. We'll be bringing you back as a guest star, I'm sure, soon.
They already unplugged my mic.
Not true.
Okay.
Good one.
Well, today we've been talking about job interviews, and it's a timely topic because interviews are a really important part of hiring, particularly when you're an older candidate. And getting that hiring manager to like you, it's all about overcoming barriers and making connections. And one of the biggest barriers that older workers face is ageism. Don't let it stop you from getting your dream job. Go to maxlist.org/fightageism to download How to Fight Ageism in a Job Interview. Do it today and learn how to overcome negative stereotypes employers have about older workers and discover what you can do to stand out as a candidate, as well as ensure that employers focus on your skills, not your age. Get your free copy of How to Fight Ageism in a Job Interview today. Visit maxlist.org/fightageism. And join us next Wednesday. Our special guest will be Thea Kelly. She'll tell us about the interview mistakes she sees smart people make. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.